Welcome, everybody, to the Clinic Technical Assistance Center's Clinical Lunch and Learn webinar series entitled Motivational Interviewing. This is part 2 of our Motivational Interviewing webinar series, presented today by Matt Wolfsey and Brian Mundy, both clinical social workers at the Institute for Community Living. They both have extensive experience in a variety of treatment modalities for children and families, and are currently trainers of a variety of different treatment modalities at the Institute for Community Living in New York City. I just wanted to go over a couple basic points before we move on to the presentation. Currently, everybody is on mute. We will hold a 10-minute FAQ at the end. If you would like to submit your questions, please do not use the raise the hand function that you have in front of you. Instead, everyone has a chat box, and you can submit your questions for the FAQ period in the chat box. If anybody is having audio problems, it is important that you call the Citrix helpline. That's the webinar system helpline at 1-866-962-6492. Again, that's 1-866-962-6492. They will be able to help you with audio problems. Unfortunately, we won't be able to help you with that directly. The PowerPoint slides are currently on our website. That's ctacny.com, ctacny.com. So currently the PowerPoint slides for the presentation are on the website. We will also post a recording of today's webinar and additional resources that the presenters will talk about after the webinar. Also, we ask that at the end of the webinar, before you leave the session, you will see or right after you leave the session, you will see a feedback survey, and we very much appreciate your feedback in that survey. So I'm happy to present that Matt and Brian are both with us again for part 2. We got a lot of feedback from those who participated in our first webinar early in the summer who said that they wanted some additional, more in-depth information on motivational interviewing. So today's webinar is specific to people who have some knowledge or experience with motivational interviewing. This is not meant to be an introductory webinar. We have that posted on our website from earlier in the summer. Instead, the presenters are going to go in a little bit deeper into some topics, but they won't review all the basic concepts again. So you can always refer back to the webinar that is posted on our website. Okay, thank you, Brian and Matt. You're welcome to get started.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for participating in this webinar. This is Matt Wolfsey, and today's objectives are to develop an applied understanding of motivation interviewing techniques and strategies related to specifically the pre-contemplation stage and contemplation stages of change.
So this is Brian Mundy, and again, we're very happy to be back. And we took a lot of folks' feedback from the last webinar that we did, and we're going to be offering some in-depth role plays today, specifically regarding pre-contemplation and contemplation. So basically, we're going to start out with contemplation, get a feel, pre-contemplation, get a feel for what folks who are in the pre-contemplation stage or on a particular change behavior, what are they saying, how do we know they're in the pre-contemplation stage. Then we're going to discuss in depth some interventions to utilize with folks who are in pre-contemplation, and then we're going to demonstrate those interventions in a role play with an adolescent. After we complete that, we're going to do the same strategy for contemplation. We're going to get a sense of, for folks who are in contemplation, how are they often presenting? What are some of the things that they're saying? What are some of the things that they're going through? And after that, offer up some strategies for a person who's in contemplation around a change behavior, and follow that up with a role play with the father of a 9-year-old boy who's struggling with some symptoms around ADHD.
So let's just review briefly the transtheoretical stage of change, which we did introduce more in depth at the last webinar. Today, as Brian was saying, we're specifically going to be focusing on pre-contemplation and contemplation. And let's just review a little bit more in depth what those two stages of change are and look like. So as you recall, pre-contemplation is that stage of change that really reflects a person's lack of desire or lack of readiness to engage in any particular change target. This is a person who tends to be quite argumentative, a person who might be putting up some walls to engaging in any kind of change effort. Some people kind of refer to it as the denial stage. I always think of it, a person could be very much aware that there's a problem, but very clear that they're not ready to engage in any particular change effort at this time. And for that person, there's very clear kind of motivational interviewing strategies that, that correlate very nicely with that stage of change, and that when used consistently with the pre-contemplator can really help shift that person from going to pre-contemplation into contemplation. Contemplation represents that stage where the person is beginning to question whether or not there actually is a problem and whether or not it would make sense for them at this time to begin to address that problem. They're not necessarily quite ready to jump into a full change effort, but there's clearly a sense of maybe there's something to take a look at here. That tends to be a less argumentative person, a person who's a little bit more open to getting some additional information, some feedback, a person who's a little bit more willing to engage in a process of exploration around potential change. The other stages of change, determination, preparation, action, maintenance, recurrence, we did review at the last webinar. Feel free to review those at your own time. We're not going to go into this specifically now because we are really looking at the pre-contemplation and contemplation stages of change at this time.
So let's do that. If we go to the next slide, we're just going to build on some of the things that Matt said about pre-contemplation. And you tend to kind of get a few, folks tend to present in a few different ways. The basic gist, as Matt said, for a person who is in pre-contemplation around a change behavior is they're not ready to change. And this can manifest in a couple of ways. Sometimes it can manifest as being very argumentative. Sometimes they blame other people. Sometimes blame is placed on the clinician himself or herself. And there's generally a lot of resistance coming your way, right? Another way that a person in pre-contemplation may present as is very agreeable. Maybe even sort of saying that you're a wonderful therapist and oh, what a wonderful idea. And then because they're not ready to change, they go out and then they engage in some of the behaviors that are on the table in the treatment. So these are, within this spectrum, we kind of get a lot of different presenting issues for the person who is in pre-contemplation. But the main thrust of pre-contemplation is that they're just not ready to change, and it's gonna show itself in a number of different ways.
So what do we do with the pre-contemplator? Earlier I had referenced some kind of motivational interviewing strategies that kind of correlate very nicely with the pre-contemplator. So what specifically are they? Firstly, it's this notion of kind of building trust and establishing rapport. That's pretty much a clear axiom across any kind of clinical practice, that nothing really happens until there's a sound clinical relationship. But motivation interviewing, especially with the pre-contemplator, reminds us that we need to really cultivate that. We need to ground all of our interventions, all of our thinking, all of our activities with clients through the conduit of a trusting, well-established rapport with clients, that nothing gets done outside of that relationship. Rolling with resistance. Again, the pre-contemplator is somebody who's going to come in and be very argumentative. They're not going to necessarily be agreeable to sitting down with you. They're not necessarily going to be agreeable to sort of acknowledging that there's a problem or that they want to, take steps to address a problem. And typically what happens is, as clinicians, we fall into this kind of inadvertent cycle with clients where we're not kind of meeting them in that resistance place, where we're trying to argue them out of that. We're trying to move them into kind of a frame of reference. Rolling with resistance is really that notion of kind of just, empathically feeding back what we're hearing from the client. So if the client is saying things like, I don't want to change, I don't need to be here, it's that ability to kind of say, so you don't want to be here, you don't really feel like this is right for you. You know, really kind of establishing that kind of personal ownership and self-representation.
And as you're going to hear, when we jump into the role play with an adolescent, you're going to hear a lot of rolling with resistance as we move forward.
So, you know, one of the ways in which we roll with resistance is through this notion of reflective listening, that ability to really communicate back, you know, what the client is saying. It's an opportunity to maybe even, you know, build in sort of a reframing kind of notion, the ability to say to somebody, if a parent's coming into a clinic and saying, I don't want to be here, you know, a reflective listening response might be something like, so you don't really want to be here, you really want to exercise your own right to make these choices, or your own choices. The ability to kind of really pull on the client's best perceived sense of self, and again, create that experience inside the client that they're being listened to and connected with rather than opposed. Inquiry about preceding events and values explorations and clarifications. I mean, these are all things that, you know, really become really important material in the motivational viewing dialogue. You know, what led you to get, you know, what brought you here? What are the things that got you here? How do the things that got you here challenge and get in the way of your existing values and the things that you care about? To what degree do you want to take a look at that? One of the things that motivational viewing really sort of drives on is really connecting with and clarifying and identifying and drawing out a client's value system. Even the most difficult adolescent's going to be coming in with things that they deeply care about, and the things that they deeply care about might be challenged and sort of eclipsed by various presenting issues and presenting events that they're not necessarily making that connection to. Our job in motivational viewing, especially with the pre-contemplator, is to begin to really anchor the change process around that value system. You know, and then, you know, obviously supporting self-efficacy by commending them for being there and you know, and drawing on their sense of self-purpose. And the last bullet, frames. It's something that will be new today. We didn't necessarily go into frames in the last webinar, and frames is something that we see as really those essential elements in driving the change process through motivational viewing, you know, with a pre-contemplator.
So clearly, everything that Matt just said, building rapport, really rolling with resistance, offering a lot of reflections, and touching on values. These are all essential techniques utilized with someone who's in pre-contemplation, and FRAMES is an acronym that sort of allows us to do this. It really kind of touches on a lot of these things. So FRAMES, F-R-A-M-E-S, stands for basically the 6 elements of effective MI to utilize with folks in pre-contemplation. The F in FRAMES stands for feedback. And feedback is merely pointing out the realities of potential consequences that may be at stake for a person who is engaged in perhaps negative behaviors, or maybe not coming to treatment, or as you'll see in the case of the vignette we have coming shortly, you know, the person's Xbox being taken away. So, you know, feedback is an opportunity to just simply introduce consequences that exist naturally in the world, and just offer them sort of as objective fact. And one of the things that Matt and I like to do when offering feedback is to even pose the question, like, listen, this seems like a good time to kind of offer some feedback. You know, would you mind if I gave you some feedback here?
Or would you be willing to hear this?
Or would you be willing to hear some feedback here? And it's a nice way to kind of couch just the objective realities and negative consequences that are in play.
R in frames is something that we see as significant and critical, especially in the work with adolescents who are in pre-contemplation, because really what we're talking about with the R is responsibility. Drawing on the person's personal responsibility and sense of control. A lot of times people come in pre-contemplation because they feel in some ways they're being dictated to, or they're being told that they have to be there, or they're being asked to look at something and take something on that they're not ready to take on. A lot of times adolescents or children are coming to a mental health clinic because somebody else is telling them to be there. They're very rarely the ones who are self-referring. So the responsibility part really allows for that client to have a sense of this is ultimately about them, and they're the ones who are going to decide whether or not they're going to make a change or not. I mean, it could sound something very similar to, it could sound like this. I mean, at the end of the day, whether you're here or not, you're here because your parents are telling you to be here and the teacher's telling you to be here, and physically you are here for these reasons. But emotionally, you are here, and whether or not you take this stuff in and work with this and try to make any changes is going to be completely up to you. Nobody can force this on you. And we tend to see when we really begin to sort of work with the responsibility part of frames, clients, particularly adolescents, feel much more a part of things, much more open, a little bit less, it just softens that part of them that doesn't want to be there.
So continuing with frames, these techniques that you utilize with folks who are in pre-contemplation, the S being feedback, the R being responsibility, we move to the A, which is advice. Now advice is one of those words that might be taboo depending on what social work school you went to or what program you went to. But advice can be important. And sometimes you can think of it as psychoed, an opportunity to offer some psychoeducation. I personally like to kind of frame it or couch it in sort of some folks say. If for example, you're working with a single mother who has a lot of things on her plate. She's managing work. She's managing, a couple of kids. In the way of offering advice, you could say, some folks say that really figuring out who can support you in these efforts and really trying to get some social support and build that social support can be really helpful. I'm wondering if we can kind of think about that together. So advice is a critical piece for someone who is in that pre-contemplation stage and might be feeling isolated in that stage.
Or, if somebody is, smoking marijuana and is in your office because, they were caught getting high, and they're not really ready to make a change about stopping marijuana. The responsibility part might be this is at the end of the day going to be your choice. Nobody can make you do anything at the end of the day. But if you are going to make a choice, would you be willing to at least be able to evaluate your choice a little bit more critically? Would you be willing to read up on, the effects of marijuana and what its impact might be? At the end of the day, you're going to choose whether or not you make these choices. But at least if you're going to make these choices, would you could have as much information and be as informed as you possibly can. The M in frames is menu of options. We also think this is very important with adolescent work because kids like to feel that they are a participant in the treatment, that they are collaborating with you on exploring possible change options. So if somebody is going to start to take responsibility and they are going to actually look at information, let's say for about marijuana, and they're going to start thinking about whether or not they want to make some changes around that, the menu of options allows the therapist and the client to mutually collaborate and co-construct possible paths towards change.
And maybe one of those choices is simply for the person to commit to showing up next week. Recognizing that, okay, you're not willing to change, but are you willing to continue this dialogue, right? So the last two, the E and the S in frames, are empathic counseling and supporting self-efficacy. Empathic counseling is something that I think we're all familiar with. It's very important to show warmth, respect, and understanding, which, let's face it, can be difficult in the face of a client who may be very resistant and might even be sort of blaming you or sort of calling you out and things like that. Self-efficacy is simply the importance of communicating a belief in the person, really sort of emphasizing strengths. And as William Miller, one of the architects of motivational interviewing, said, a person cannot change unless that person believes that he or she can do it. Oftentimes, they're not hearing that message. They're not hearing a message that folks believe in them, and it's very important that they do hear that. And sometimes that role on the part of the clinician is extremely important. So that is frames, and as you'll see, we're going to hit all of these interventions in the vignette, which is on the next slide. So Matt and I are going to head into a vignette involving Raphael. And I'm going to read the vignette, and Matt and I are going to, basically do a session and do a conversation. And here's the vignette. Raphael is a 14-year-old adolescent who was brought into treatment a month and a half ago by his foster parents due to sudden drop in grades and interest in school, poor eating and sleeping habits, missing curfew, and excessive involvement in video games. His foster mother suspects that he is smoking weed. He often expresses that he's bored, and he really feels that therapy is a waste of time. He sees no problem and continuously cites his foster mother as the problem. He is in your office today to discuss a school suspension for having marijuana in his backpack and having lost his Xbox as a consequence for his recent behaviors. So before Matt and I launch into this, and in this vignette, Matt is going to play the clinician and I'm going to play Raphael, what we would like you guys to do is on a piece of paper or somewhere off to the side, just kind of mark down the interventions that we just covered, mark down the ones that you hear. For example, when you hear feedback, maybe mark down feedback. When you hear some rolling with resistance, mark that down. And what we're going to do after the vignette is complete, we're going to put sort of our order of how we see the interventions listed, and then the script identifying each intervention will be available to you guys when the webinar is over. Okay, so hopefully that's clear. So try and identify the interventions as we begin this vignette.
So, Raphael, listen, I know you don't want to be here, but tell me about the Xbox.
I don't know. My mom is being so... Can I just go? I don't want to be here.
Raphael, listen, whether you stay or go is up to you. At the end of the day, no one can make you stay here. You know that. I know that you and your mom got into a big fight and she took your Xbox away.
I just wish she didn't try to control me all the time.
So you feel like she gets in your way?
Yeah, she's whack. She thinks that she's my real mother and that she can tell me what to do.
You don't feel like she has the right to tell you what to do?
She's always in my business. She doesn't understand me. She feels like because she feeds me and does my laundry that she can, like, run my life.
So even though your mom does all this stuff for you, you should be able to run your own life?
I don't know.
So, Raphael, let me tell you what I'm seeing. You seem to be caught in a cycle with your mom where you see her as trying to control you, and you get really upset and behave in a way to show that you are your own person. And this return gets in your mom to come down on you harder. So basically, your mom comes down harder, and this cycle goes on and on until you lose something like your Xbox. The thing is, I don't see this cycle breaking by itself. And this continues, and if this continues, I'm concerned that you're always going to find yourself in this situation with your mother.
Yeah, it really sucks. We fight all the time, and then I end up losing my stuff. That's not fair.
And having your own stuff is important to you.
Yeah, especially my Xbox. I mean, sometimes it's like the only thing I look forward to about going home.
So losing it is a real disappointment.
Duh.
So I'm wondering where the pot comes in.
I smoke with my friends. I mean, come on, it's no big deal. There's nothing else to do here.
So you enjoy smoking, you like hanging out with your friends, and the pot helps you with boredom.
Yeah, man, it chills me out.
Because you've been feeling kind of stressed lately.
Yeah.
Tell me about it.
I wake up mad sometimes. I can't concentrate in school. Every morning is like a big fight with my mom. And now this suspension, it's just, I don't know.
So you feel like the suspension set you back?
Yeah, I don't want that, I don't want to stay back. That goes on your record, man.
So having a record is important to you?
I guess.
Your mom's getting in the way a little bit.
Yeah, and it's not like coming here is helping.
It feels like a waste of time to come here.
Yeah, it's just another way for my mom to control me.
So, Raphael, may I offer you something on this? At the end of the day, the responsibility is yours. I mean, people can tell you what to do, but you make the choice as to whether or not you listen. Your mom tells you to come here, but whether or not you participate is completely up to you. Nobody can take it away from you. That said, this time here is yours to use in whatever way you want. The struggle with your mom continues to happen. Getting suspended from school, losing your Xbox gets you upset. And right now, there's really nothing telling us that this cycle is going to break. At the end of the day, the choice is going to be yours, but I'm wondering if we think through together how to make choices that get that gets your mom off your back might be something that you might want to work on.
What do you mean?
Well, it's hard work. I know you can do it, but let's listen. You can't control your mom. We know that, but you do have some control over how you respond to her. Can we think through some ways? I mean, when your mom is in your business, that you can respond in such a way that she doesn't take away your Xbox?
Yeah. I mean, I get that yelling at her just never helps.
What are your thoughts about that?
I mean, I don't know. I guess I could try not to yell.
So you'd be willing to play around with not yelling next time she comes down on you?
Yeah, especially if that helps me get my Xbox back.
All right, so that seems like a good start. Would you want to start there?
I guess. Okay, so that was a vignette to illustrate some of the interventions utilized for someone who is in the pre-contemplation phase. As you could tell from the vignette, Raphael is pretty resistant. He's blaming everything on his foster mother. And not only that, there really wasn't a lot of ownership taken throughout the whole session. There was a little bit of movement, but you can tell that Raphael is not ready to stop with the big issues on the table, right? He's not ready to stop smoking pot. Some of the school behaviors haven't really been addressed by Raphael, but he's willing to maybe stop yelling if it gets his Xbox back, right? So there's a little movement just in terms of the therapeutic relationship. You heard a lot of reflection. And as you can see on this slide sort of spells out the way that we see the interventions as they rolled through. So every time Matt, as the clinician, said something, that essentially represents a bullet point here identifying the intervention that we used. At the end of this webinar, we're going to provide some time for Q&A. So if you have specific questions about the vignette that we just did, mark it down, and hopefully we'll have room for it at the end.
Okay. So now let's go to contemplation. So now we're going to go to contemplation. And the question that we want to start to pose is, how do you know if someone is in contemplation stage? I mean, what are these, essential features of contemplation? So, A, the person who's in contemplation may formally, recognize some or one downside to a particular area of concern. The contemplator tends to be less argumentative, so whereas the pre-contemplator is very much about, I don't need to be here, no, this is not about me, I don't want to make a change. The contemplator tends to be a little bit less argumentative, a little bit more willing to dialogue, is more willing to explore costs and benefits of behaviors. So this is a person who's willing to look at both downside, positive sides and downsides, and begin just to kind of, sit with that natural sort of ambivalence that we all have. And finally, not necessarily willing to make a change. I mean, this is what's really critical. I mean, a lot of times as clinicians, we want people to make a change beyond their readiness. The contemplator is not willing to make a change. They're willing to explore change. They're willing to look at their ambivalence. They're willing to explore the downsides and positive sides to any particular area, but they're not necessarily willing to step into change just yet. And our job is to provide motivational interviewing strategies that are consistent with that place. So what do you do? Techniques that have proven to be very effective in the contemplation stage, in this particular case, with adolescents or in children, is to start off by just summarizing the concern. We want to be able to communicate to our client that we are hearing them, that we understand the complexity and the difficulty of any particular change target, that we understand that there's some sense of not wanting to change, that there's some sense of wanting to remain in the familiar, that there's some sense of being told that they have to make a change when they're not ready and that they're losing control. We want to, as best as we can, hear that, reflect that, and pull that together into a summary. Next is normalizing ambivalence. A lot of times people in the contemplation stage are really feeling caught between these two sides, and they might even feel uncomfortable with those two sides. And our job as motivational reviewers is to universalize and normalize this experience. It is not abnormal to feel like I want to give up smoking pot, but I don't want to give up smoking pot, or I want to start doing my homework and go to tutoring, or not, but I don't want to go to homework to do my tutoring. People are caught constantly in this cycle, this dynamic tension from within, pushing them and pulling them in different directions, and it becomes very sort of containing to have a clinician just normalize that experience. Next, we want to support self-efficacy. One of the things that Brian alluded to earlier, and I want to just reinforce here, is that a lot of our clients, particularly adolescents, have lost a sense of self-command, self-control, an ability to really affect change, to affect their environment, to affect the adults in their lives. Our job as motivation reviewers is to reconnect them with that belief, that these are folks that have a lot to say, they have a lot that they bring to the table, and we want to sort of mirror that back, help them to sort of reconnect with that inner sense of, I can make changes, I am self-causing enough to affect my environment and the people around me. Reinforce feedback. Again, as Brian said earlier in the feedback stage, that is where we are just very simply evening the playing field, basically saying to a client, listen, here's what I'm seeing. Here's what I see is going on. Can I point out to you a cycle that I'm seeing? It's just, again, providing that objective, kind of indisputable, factual information that is being presented, that the client has right to have fed back to them, and so they can begin to synthesize through it and integrate it and make choices accordingly. Next, examine the client's understanding and expectations of treatment. A lot of times, we have a clear expectation of treatment. The parent has a clear expectation of treatment. The teacher, the principal has a clear expectation of treatment. But we have no idea what the client's expectation for treatment is. And if we're often running with other expectations or expectations that are divergent from the client's expectations, we're going to lose them. So we always want to be clarifying and examining with the client what their expectation for change is.
And similarly, you may have some parents who sort of have an expectation that they send their kid and it's going to fix everything, right? So sometimes we have to assist managing expectations with parents as well.
In contemplation stage, again, one of the things that anchors change across the board is value exploration. We always want to be pulling for values. Everybody has something that matters to them. The kids that we see in our offices, the adolescents that we see in our offices, the parents of the kids that we see in offices have things that deeply matter to them. They might have lost connection to those values. Those values might be eclipsed by a lot of static and that's happening in their environments and in their lives and the stress points. But at the end of the day, we want to reconnect people to why they want to be in this life and what they are working toward. Next, develop discrepancy. As we talked about in the first webinar, developing discrepancy is really the cognitive aspect of motivational reviewing. It's that ability to get people to really take a cognitive appraisal and stock of their behaviors against their values. So if somebody's telling you, I don't want to stay back, I don't want my promotion to be in doubt, I want to go to the next level, but yet is ditching school or getting high or staying out until 4 in the morning and not doing homework, obviously those behaviors are not lining up with that value. And what the development of discrepancy gives us the ability to really flesh that out with the client and put that before them. Next, explore the scientific benefit, the specific benefits of costs and benefits to making a change. This is really what we're calling about. This is the pros and the cons work. This is decisional balancing, and this is the sort of the tried and true sort of strategy proper for contemplation.
So here on this slide, you'll see a worksheet that is available for download once the webinar is over. And this is a decisional balancing worksheet. And you're going to hear the clinician go through a decisional balancing exercise with the next client. And it merely sort of spells out the benefits and costs of continuing the behavior versus the benefits and costs of stopping the behavior. This is a worksheet that is very helpful. We got it from the SAMHSA Tip 35 toolkit, and you're free to use it. It's available to the public, so you're free to download it from the CTAC website and use it in your own work. The last technique that we really want to highlight before launching into the vignette is the power of mirroring self-motivational statements, otherwise known as sustained talk. Sometimes when a person is in contemplation, particularly when a person is in pre-contemplation, you often hear some self-motivational statements, and sometimes they may come across as desire, like I really want this, but I can't, as the ability, like I know I can do this, as reasons listing off some of the consequences that they want to avoid, right, or need, I really need to make this happen. And the research shows, and the excellent research that Miller and Rolnick did in motivational interviewing, is that the more the clinician mirrors these statements, sort of puts them in their back pocket, brings them out again, the more likely the client is going to start mirroring that sustained talk as well. This is particularly important in contemplation, where they are seeing some downsides to the behavior, and they're really trying to weigh the ambivalence. Okay, so we're now going to move into the second vignette, and this has to do with Simon. Simon is a 9-year-old boy who was diagnosed with ADHD, and he was referred to the clinic 3 months ago. His father, Rob, is raising 3 kids on his own. Simon gets into repeated difficulties at school, resulting in Rob having to miss work in order to attend to matters. While he wants Simon to succeed in school, he's really ambivalent about following up with recommendations for medication and/or implementing behavior modification strategies at home. The family's attendance in the last 3 months has been very inconsistent. Now, again, as before, we're going to launch into the vignette, and what we'd like you to do is, if you can, just sort of mark down, every time the clinician speaks, mark down one of the interventions that have been identified in the last few slides, and then we'll provide that order and the script as we continue. And in this case, I'm going to play the clinician, and Matt is playing Rob, who is the father of Simon. Okay, here we go. It's nice to see you. It's been a couple of weeks since you've been to the clinic.
Yeah, I've been really busy lately. Between work, drop-off, and pick-up at school, getting the kids in bed, taking care of shopping, I just don't have the time to come here.
Wow, you've got a lot on your plate.
It's hard. You wouldn't know.
Tell me about it.
Well, I haven't really seen any help for coming here, first off. Simon continues to have problems at school, and how can you expect me to come here when I'm already missing work to go to school and deal with Simon's teachers and principals?
I see. You're really busy as it is, and Simon's difficulties are making everything harder, including coming here. You have yet to see any results.
Yeah, I thought twice about coming here today, but I feel like now I have to worry about you guys calling Child Protective Services or something.
Yeah, so not only are Simon's difficulties stressing you out, but the whole notion of coming here is adding to your stress. You barely have time in the day with pickup, drop-off, getting the kids clothed, fed, and your work requirements. Coming here really needs to feel worthwhile in order for you to make a commitment.
Yeah. I mean, when am I going to start seeing results? I mean, aren't you the expert?
Yeah, I mean, that question makes a lot of sense, Rob. Let's take a look at it. What are some of your expectations around therapy?
Listen, I'm dealing with so much, and I bring in here for you to tell me what to do so things can get better. When is that going to start to happen?
I hear that. I mean, I'm hearing that you really care about your son, you want Simon to succeed, and you really want some answers.
Yeah, so when are you going to give them to me?
Yeah. I mean, you're frustrated because you hope that there would be a clear and immediate solution to this.
I mean, yeah. I mean, that's why you are here, right?
I think everyone involved wishes that it were that easy. But, can I give you some feedback here? Unfortunately, this work is naturally more ambiguous than maybe going for a checkup at the doctor. We know that for kids like Simon who struggle with attention, it can take some trial and error to develop and reinforce the skills needed for Simon to succeed. This trial and error process works best when there's a collaboration between, myself and you, the school, and Simon.
Well, I don't have time for that.
Yeah, I mean, you're so busy, you're pulled in so many different directions. The idea of working with Simon on developing skills seems too much.
Well, it's not that it's too much, it's just time-consuming.
Okay, so it takes up a lot of time, but at the same time, you're frustrated with having to go down to the school to put out fires.
Yep.
And so far, putting out fires hasn't yielded results yet, and somehow coming here to work on things feels overwhelming. You feel really stuck.
Yeah, I'm spread so thin, I'm wondering if it's worth the effort.
I hear that. Let me tell you, it's completely natural to feel two ways about getting involved in treatment here. It's a big commitment, and it's not always clear-cut. Would it be all right if we took a closer look at both sides of how you're feeling about this?
If you say so.
Well, sometimes I find it helps folks to get this stuff down on paper. Like you said, as you're going out, taking care of your family's needs, sometimes it can feel a little muddled on inside. Here, on this sheet of paper, on one side, we have the cons of really getting involved in treatment. On the other side, we have the potential pros of getting involved.
Yeah, so for the cons, it feels really time-consuming. There is assurance that it really works. I don't even know if it's going to work. I have other kids to support and focus on. I have to juggle work. I'm tired, man.
Okay, so it feels like a lot of time and commitment, and the gravitational pull of these other areas is really hard to ignore. Meanwhile, you have yet to see results. Are there any other downsides?
What you need, what you need more. I'm not sure about this medication thing. I mean, like they want to put my kid on medication. I don't know if that's a good idea. I think it might be a bad idea.
Okay, I hear that. I mean, another downside here is that you worry the clinic is going to push for Simon to go on a medication when you're not sure it's a good idea.
Yeah, that's it.
As a parent, you take these matters seriously, and you reserve the right to be concerned about the effects of medication.
I decide what's best for my son.
Absolutely. You want to make the final call, and let me assure you this will always be the case. What might be some benefits to coming and being involved and putting some strategies into practice?
I mean, I can show Simon that I'm stepping up for him. I worry that sometimes he feels alone in this. I also worry that he's getting older, and I don't want this stuff to get worse.
So you really feel that coming here will demonstrate to Simon how much you care about him and how you don't want him to struggle with this alone.
Yeah, man, like I struggled in school. I almost dropped out. No one even talked to me about this stuff with my parents. No one ever, took time to even make an issue of this.
So on a deep level, you can really identify with what Simon's going through.
Yeah.
And one of the pros of getting involved in the work is you can provide Simon with a different experience than what you had.
Yeah.
Yeah, and all this stuff with the school is reminding you of your experiences, and it might bring back some feeling of frustration for you.
So I never thought of it that way. I mean, I guess that's true.
So coming here regularly and getting involved in the work would show Simon that you're here for him. It would hopefully help Simon feel less isolated with some of the problems going on, and it may offer Simon a different experience from the one that you had growing up.
Yeah, and me constantly getting called down to the school is not helping.
Okay. So far, this cycle of going down to the school is not helping Simon develop skills, yet you're also not sure if the treatment can help with this.
How do I know it's worth it?
Well, one of the things I'm hearing is that you went through similar challenges when you were a kid. You're an expert on your own experiences, and you're also an expert on your own son. I'm wondering, Rob, if we can begin thinking of this treatment as an opportunity to offer up your expertise and guiding hand to your son.
Yeah, listen, I really need to think about it.
Okay, so that ends our vignette meant to demonstrate contemplation techniques. And if you go to the next slide, again, you can see sort of how we identified the interventions utilized by the clinician when working with Rob, who is exhibiting contemplation around really engaging in treatment for his son, Simon. As with the pre-contemplation vignette, the script of the actual conversation and then the interventions identified associated with each clinician intervention are available for download once this webinar is concluded.
Okay, so in summary, again, unless it's an emergency or crisis, clinicians need to be able to sit with client ambivalence and really begin to sort of help clients to work towards change and choice. Rolling with resistance, building trust and rapport, and utilizing frames can serve to meet clients who are in the pre-contemplation stage around change behavior. Decisional balancing combined with reflection and summarizing that allows the ambivalence to linger in the therapeutic space is an effective way to meet clients in the contemplation stage around a particular change behavior.
So that concludes the presentation portion of the webinar, and I think we have some time for questions.
Thank you so much, Brian and Matt, for providing us with such a great presentation on motivational interviewing. I think we all particularly enjoyed your role-playing as you were able to really illustrate some of the techniques instead of just speaking about it, but actually showing how you would use it with possible clients. So I think we have a few minutes now to go into Q&A period. I did want to remind everybody as they're thinking about questions to submit, there's a chat box in front of you that you can type in your questions. And we can take a few questions now. I also wanted to remind you that the PowerPoint is currently posted on our CTAC NY website. That's ctacny.com. And the webinar recording, the actual recording of the webinar, will also be posted shortly. And the 2 scripts of the role play, as well as the decisional balancing worksheet, will also be posted shortly on the website. So I think we have a couple questions coming in. The first one is, how do you address parents who are unwilling to consider an alternative in their parenting style?
Yeah, I mean, very good question. And I mean, that if a person's unwilling to consider a change in parenting style, that might be someone who's consistent with a pre-contemplator, right? If they're that adamant and they're that sort of opposed to taking a look at how their parenting style might be contributing to the difficulties that their child might be having, we would want to sort of utilize these same techniques. We would want to, first of all, sort of validate their experience, that they, they feel like they're kind of, getting it right, that they like how they are approaching their parenting with their child. We would want to continue to provide some feedback about ways in which the behavior isn't going away, that even though they're pretty clear that they like how they're approaching it, it's not getting them to the place with their child that they would want, and that on some level a cycle has come into place, and that it's our job together to kind of think about ways to break cycles. And a lot of times what I say to parents are, that cycles happen. We fall into these cycles with our kids, and they just kind of self-perpetuate. And that cycles, can be broken, and when they're broken, new behaviors and new experiences can emerge. And often it's the parent that is in the better position to kind of break that cycle.
And one of the nice things about really illustrating that it's a cycle rather than the parent's parenting style is that it's taking the blame off the parent. A lot of parents who come into the clinics feel blamed. Maybe they're getting some blame thrown away by the school inadvertently. Sometimes just the nature of the intake process has the parents feeling a little bit blamed. And we really want to be able to validate the parents' experiences. It's not that they're not creative enough. It's not that they don't have some great parenting styles, but the bottom line is that this cycle is happening, and unless that cycle begins to shift a little bit, it's hard to imagine things changing towards the value of them wanting a better life for their kids.
Right. So a lot of times parents are going to come in and they're going to feel, they might be very proud. They might feel sort of a natural suspiciousness to coming to a professional. They might be masking some sense of kind of vulnerability. And I love the idea of kind of just talking about it in terms of cycles, like Brian was just saying. I always try to kind of find that cycle. I like to call it kind of a symptomatic cycle. And I'll say, let me just sort of share with you what I see going on. Mom, when you, Johnny is creating an experience in you, Mom, that's making you feel disrespected. And when you feel disrespected, you come down harder and try to discipline more. And then when Johnny feels that he's being disciplined more, he acts out even more, which Mom makes you feel more disrespected. I'm wondering if we could is saying something like, you know what, I'm sick of getting these fights with my parents. I'm tired of getting grounded. I hate the fact that I don't have any Xbox. I can't play video games. I can't get on the computer. I really want to I want all these privileges back. I want this to stop. And then goes home, from the appointment and does something that immediately is going to bring attention over to them from their parents, and then subsequently get grounded and have all these things kind of perpetuate. The discrepancy that happens that gets built in the next session, it's really sort of an honoring of the difficult struggle that this is. It's being able to say to Brian, Brian, so listen, you're caught in a difficult struggle. I get it. On one level, you want all these things back. You want your parents off your back. But at another level, it's really hard to not get to not get into it with your father when he pisses you off. I get that this is a real struggle inside of you. The question is, where do you want to go with this? Where do you want to take this? At the end of the day, it's going to be your choice. So it's really beginning to sort of honor the struggle. It's recognizing that people's strategies that are discrepant from their values are just that, strategies, self-protective strategies aimed at helping them to navigate their world, but at the same time, it's not working in a way that's moving them toward their values.
Great.
Okay, so that's developing discrepancy. I understand we might have cut out a little bit there, but we're going to move on.
I think you were fine. I think we have one more question, though, that I think would be helpful to address. So we have one participant who said, what happens when you have a client who says yes to everything but never follows through? What are some recommendations for that case?
Well, again, some feedback, right? I mean, if a client, and again, this doesn't happen only in one, the thing to remember about motivational interviewing is that this is a gradual, ongoing, sustained dialogue that we're having with clients, right? It's not like, you're doing this evidence-based practice and then boom, everything's going to be resolved. So if a pattern starts to develop where a client is saying yes, 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 but then their behavior shows the opposite, at some point, the therapist is going to be in a position to feed that back. Being able to say, listen, can I give you some feedback? I'm noticing that we're talking about this stuff and that, you kind of agree and you say yes, but then somehow or another, it doesn't happen, that, the behaviors continue or the difficulties behavior continue. And this isn't about blame. This is really about maybe taking a look at how difficult this is and how hard it is to kind of make these changes, and whether or not you even really are agreeing with the things that we're talking about here. Maybe there's a part of you that doesn't even agree, and it's difficult for you to tell me that. Our job is to have a collaboration. My guess would be that on some level you're not fully agreeing or you're not 100% buying into the things that we're talking about, because the things, you say yes, but it doesn't really happen. Again, it's not a criticism, but it's an opportunity for us to maybe take a harder look at what's really going on.
Absolutely. I agree with Matt, and I see it as an opportunity to really validate the struggle that the parent is going through. They're saying yes to these things, and then they're not doing them. And let's really explore some of the reasons that this isn't happening, because clearly this is a struggle for you. Let's put this on the table. Maybe there are cultural issues at play. There could be any sort of forces at play, and really validating that struggle is a window into exploring why this dynamic is occurring.
Okay, I think I have one more question, and then we'll wrap up. So do you run the risk of reinforcing resistance by using reflection technique too much? I think we noticed in the role plays that you use reflection quite a bit. Can you attend to that for a minute, and how is that helpful?
Because again, when we're talking about motivation interviewing, and again, it goes down to that very basic kind of clinical axiom, that everything sort of grows out of the relationship that we establish with our clients. And reflection is there to really cultivate that empathic resonance, that empathic understanding that we establish with our clients. So if a client is saying something, they're all, more often than not, they're met in life with a sort of a counter response, an argumentative response. They're very, and we know from research that when you engage in a point-counterpoint with a client, you're only strengthening resistance, you're only strengthening the disconnect between you and the client. So reflection is really that opportunity to bring the client in, to continue the dialogue, and to create the conditions necessary to bring in some of these other motivational interviewing techniques, such as developing discrepancy, providing feedback, fostering self-efficacy.
And one of the things that Bill Miller said is he named it motivational dialoguing rather than motivational interviewing. If you'll notice in the role plays, there's actually not a lot of questions, and it's really the reflections that sort of drive the interactions.
Okay. So thank you so much, Brian and Matt, for doing such a wonderful presentation. I did want to show you that we have some resources in the slides that will also you can go to get some additional information. There's a lot of information out there, and if you want some more in-depth knowledge around it, here are some possible resources. And again, the recording, the PowerPoint, the role play, the worksheet will all be available on our website, ctechny.com. And I also wanted to tell you about our next webinar. The next webinar is going to be presented by David Meichenbaum. If we can show the last slide, please. By David Meichenbaum on Tuesday, November 13th from 12 to 1 on autism spectrum disorders and mental health outpatient settings. Also, as you're closing out of the webinar, there is a feedback survey. We read all our feedback, so it's very important that you please complete that and let us know what you thought about today's webinar and any suggestions for future webinars. If you have any additional questions, please email us at the email on the slide, kara.dean-assail@mssm.edu. Thank you again for joining us today. Have a good afternoon.